Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Title IX Insider. Welcome to our second season, and we're very excited to begin this season with Nandini, one of our great team members who you've all seen on our podcast previously. Today, we're going to be starting our new season with a very special topic that Nandini is going to introduce. And just want to say thank you so much for returning to watch us. Remember to subscribe to us and like us, and of course, give some comments whenever you have any questions or would like us to respond to you privately. We're here, we're available, and we're ready to communicate with you. So thank you again. And Nandini, I'm going to go ahead and say hello to you and feel free to begin our new conversation for our new season.
Thank you, Dr. Sandy. It's great to be back to the second season of recording. And there are a lot of topics we're going to talk about this season, but I think the one I really wanted to start our second season around with was like consent as like the biggest broad topic, and then kind of just like go into aspects of it. So the one thing I wanted to talk about like for this one was this very alarming thing I saw online on TikTok, and it was like a trend where basically um, guys were or like partners, male partners were not spiking, but adding like pre-workout powder to their partners, like evening drinks and beverages and stuff. And on the surface of it, it may seem like a prank or like a couple's joke that, oh, I'm just like, adding pre-workout powder. But then I was reading the comments and I did some like Google search, and turns out pre-workout powder amounts to almost like 1.5 to 3 cups of caffeine. And the reason they were adding the pre-workout powder was so that their partners couldn't like later at night say that they were too tired to have sex and kind of are just like energized to go for it kind of a thing. And that made me realize it's almost essentially it's like a new way of spiking drinks in a way. And pre-workout powders, like with the amount of caffeine they pack, they're really like energetic and energizing. And it's not recommended to like have it if you don't know you're consuming it, because it's like a burst of energy kind of a thing. And with the goal in mind to ensure that like the partners aren't too tired to like have sex later at night was what was the alarming thing to me, that they are kind of blurring that line of consent. And it's not essentially it's not like just reckless, it's a fundamental violation of consent. By changing the way their partners bodies react with stimulants, they're taking away the possibility to authentically and clearly say no, like just a plain simple no. And what's worse about this is it doesn't look like the stereotypical danger we associate with spiking, like date rape, drugs, or like roofies. It's something that's there probably in every household where, one person or the couple works out. And that's what's even more dangerous because it's happening in the kitchen, in your house, in an area that's supposed to be safe for you. And because it's happening within relationships, at least on TikTok, the way I saw it, it's been framed as this like humorous trend when it's like much worse than that. And I think it focuses on asking a bigger question that as a culture, how do we constantly keep redefining consent, and why in that redefinition it's almost like we're mocking the idea of consent or making a joke off of it. And like too often I've seen in like comment sections and maybe like tweets and stuff, it's treated as a very negotiable, blurry like line. It's not something set in concrete, more like something that's been drawn in the sand. It can be moved around very fluidly. And it's almost like this trend also, it's almost like treating your partner's exhaustion as like an obstacle to get over to have sex, instead of, acknowledging that they may be tired after doing a whole day of their whole activities and lives, and they also need to be treated with that respect and love. And it makes it clear that, like, some people, at least this trend shows that some people do not take consent to be as like written in stone, but this constant moving target that, you can push around or manipulate until they get what they want. And I think what I found even more troubling, and that's why I think I wanted to open our second season with this, is because it's it looks like it's a lot of play around the word, like the language of consent specifically. And that seems to be like an ongoing thing. By couching it in like this world of fitness and like relationship humor and couples jokes, it's normalized what actually is like coercive behavior into getting your partner into the bedroom at night. And it teaches that persistence or trickery or even like chemical shortcuts are a valid tool or a valid way to get sex rather than reinforcing the idea that real intimacy can only start with respect and choice. And I think that's why it was essential to open this new season by talking about consent because of stories like this. They remind us that consent is not just a legal standard, but it's also a cultural one. And the ways in which it's bent or blurred or being tested constantly, whether it's online, in schools, wherever the pressure points are, shows how porous the boundaries have become. And the more porous they become, the easier it is for harm to be inflicted and hidden under like trends and humor and jokes. And I think this is where I was like thinking about how you have seen firsthand how schools and communities may be wrestling with these challenges as part of like prevention awareness events or like, interacting with the student body. And when consent gets framed this way, like in a way that's quietly manipulated or joked about, what do you think the signals about where prevention should go? What do you think those signals should be? Like, how should we shape prevention when we constantly keep seeing that consent as an idea and word is being redefined?
The first things I think about when I think of prevention are truly the difference between a healthy and an unhealthy relationship. Because when we begin to define that, we begin to see what exactly is going on and is it okay or is it not? At the end of the day, if a relationship is enjoying each other, they're having sex, and they want to have some sort of included beverage, included, I mean, sometimes people have um, infused caffeine infused chocolate, for example, which will increase the blood flow, which will stimulate sexual desire. They're aphrodisiacs, libido enhancements. And when relationships go into having sexual intercourse because they're having fun, that playfulness is there, and they're doing it consensually together to enjoy the intimacy as a relationship in a healthy way, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So if the individual is adding something to the drink at home because they both know they're going to be tired and this is something that's going to create joy for them and pleasure for them, mutually respecting one another, mutually consenting, that is one thing. So that's where I would categorize this on the prevention scale as a healthy relationship example that we can all be discussing in our homes, with our children, at schools, with our students, with our employees. But then when we begin to think about prevention and we think about unhealthy relationships, which unfortunately can lead to abusive relationships, we begin to look at this spectrum, and unhealthy relationships then we begin to see examples of what we're seeing on TikTok with what you're describing, which is individuals doing this without their partner knowing, without their partner consenting. And that would be and should be categorized as unhealthy. Now, should it be considered abusive right off the bat? Yes and no. It really truly depends on the relationship and what is going on behind the scenes. Watching a TikTok video, you can't really tell what is really happening. Maybe the female or the male do know what's happening. They already know about it. They think it's funny after the fact because it's something that they usually do anyways. Something like that of a conversation. If that's happening, it's a little different, especially when they themselves have consented and they know that this is something that they want to do. Um, but what if it's completely secret? What if it's never been something that they've ever said, oh, sure, yeah, do that tonight. Or, you know what? Yeah, no problem. Let's go ahead and do that. Um, they've never consented. They've never heard about it. and they all of a sudden have this energy and they're expected to perform. And they still may not want to perform, but the partner knows they have the energy. So then there could potentially be some force involved. That is unhealthy. That begins to take us into this abusive realm. And that is where we begin to see the issues of dating violence, domestic violence. And that is, we're really what this is about. This is about if this is happening behind the scenes, what forms of dating violence and domestic violence are happening in these relationships. Because the individual doing this is not getting consent. Instead, they're manipulating the situation, trying to control the situation, and trying to control the behavior and the chemicals of the partner they're with. So I think about Gisele Pelicot, for example. She was drugged by her husband. And, we all saw that she was raped by hundreds of men when she was drugged. Now, kind of like a roofie that you mentioned, she was incapacitated. She was not aware of what was happening. She only knew the symptoms after the fact. Um, I bring this up even though it is extreme compared to what we're discussing right now. Um, the reality is when someone is drugged, even if it's minimally, if they have not consented, and it is an unhealthy situation leading to abuse because the reality is, if it's not consensual, the behavior can escalate. The individual will enjoy what's happening and maybe add a little bit more, maybe change it up a little bit, and maybe they will add some Rohypnol, to roofie the individual, test the waters to see what exactly happens if I mix this with that. And so, obviously, we at Title IX Consulting Group are completely opposed to that type of behavior. Um, but my point is, Gisele Pelicot, what she experienced over years of time was something that began at one point and escalated over time. She wasn't drugged with the same drug that we hear about at the end where she's, being raped by hundreds of men. Her husband must have attempted smaller drugs at first to see how her body reacted. Then he tested things and then he increased things. And so if someone is adding something to someone's drink, the reason that it's not okay 100% when there's no consent is because it can escalate into something worse. That behavior can escalate in the mind of that person where potentially they could become a deviant, manipulating someone and controlling them and thinking to themselves, hey, I can drug them and maybe do even more things. And so that's where the concern and the fear come in. And that's where the domestic violence and the dating violence come in because of the fact that we do not know exactly the intention of this individual. And that intention is the fear factor.
I think that's what I was also thinking when you were talking that one, I think the two elements to this trend and just generally the concept of spiking or roofing your partner or the whoever their drink is, I think one, the lack of consent, definitely. And second, like you said, the intentionality behind it. Because once you believe that the little bit of the drugging that you've done works or worked, or, it resulted in something that you wanted, it kind of bolsters you to try something even stronger or kind of give into more of your thoughts, more of like a process where there's more coercion and less respect. And then that can keep escalating. And then suddenly it gets to a point where it's like alarming. And you're like, oh, did it begin right now? But then if you look back, it's been going on and it's been starting at like small, small, small points. So I think, like you said, intentionality really matters because when I was looking at this trend online, also, a few of them were like, and I'll be honest, when I was looking at the trend, a few of them were like, it looked like their partners were in on the joke. because they had like their partner pop into the video or whatever. And then there were a few that was just doing it like in the hidden while their partner's in the shower or like while they're not around. And then they are like in the caption, they're joking about it, that, oh, we will see the results later tonight. And that's where I think that intentionality comes in, that their intentions inherently are not to respect their partner's boundaries.
Hmm.
And that's what is troublesome to me because even when we think about like preventive efforts, and you and I have worked on a lot of preventive efforts, and we are constantly evolving it to make it fit like the current landscape of what is happening. But when you are entering these spaces of, and I think that's my second question, when you're entering these spaces of like things like consent being redefined in all these like small ways all the time, how do you shape prevention efforts for the younger generations who are online all the time, who see this behavior and may think, oh, it's normal, oh, it's okay, because it's not a chemical or it's not a drug. It's like, something that's organic I'm putting in their drink, so it shouldn't be a problem. And I think that's where my question is, that how do you define or how do you set prevention efforts in that context?
Hmm. I think really it comes down to individuals remembering that when they're posting on TikTok, what's making that dangerous is that other people are viewing it and thinking that it's okay. Younger generation individuals are viewing it and thinking, oh, everybody does this. This is something that I should do. This is something I can try. This is something I can experiment with. And when we experiment with drugs or we experiment with caffeine, those individuals that overdose when we are experimenting these kinds of things is something that we should be thinking about because those extreme situations can happen. And we need to remember that as a generation that has so much IT and so much AI and so much social media, that we might be thinking this is a joke, that it's funny, that no one's going to take this seriously. Obviously, I get her consent, but this is just funny because I'm trying to get so many likes and so many audience building up. Well, there's individuals and there's kids that are watching it that take it seriously. They don't know it's a joke. You mentioned that there's partners that, you think to yourself, oh, they're okay with it. They like pop into the screen. There's other partners that might not be okay with it. But when we think about prevention programming, I would be talking about the fact that not everything that you see is real. And sometimes things are exaggerated and sensationalized simply to get a bigger fan base. And what's unfortunate about that is the individuals on these screens are not thinking about the impact that they're making on younger kids, on men and boys that might be ostracized right now, feeling rejected in a relationship. And they think to themselves, this is the approach they should take. And then they escalate the behavior. And then we're dealing with the dating domestic violence situation, an unhealthy, abusive situation because it began with a joke. It began with something very simple, but then led into something different. And so I know individuals don't tend to think that way naturally. They think about the one individual moment and they think it's funny. They don't think about where else this can go. But that's where we come in. And we do want to represent the fact that when you do something like this without the consent of the partner, it is not okay. It can be dangerous and it can lead into an escalating behavior that is deviant. So let's say that a little boy is watching these videos and he has some sexual gratification issues already, and he's going to test drugging a dog or test drugging, or when I say drugging, I mean with the caffeine, right? Um, Test giving this extra caffeine to their baby sister or to their little cousin. It's a juvenile giving it to their neighbor to see what happens. And then they test, well, this is what happened here. So let's try this on this other person. Let's try this other form of powder drug, pill to see what happens when I give this to somebody else. And so that escalating behavior, which is what I call it, because that's exactly what it is, they're testing it out to see what happens, may not start off as this deviant behavior, but it can play out to become deviant. And why would we put this out on social media to make it look funny when there's someone out there that could take it very seriously and cause harm and cause abuse? And at the end of the day, we're going to look at them and say, oh, they shouldn't have done that. At the end of the day, we're going to look at them and say how horrible of a human that is that they did that, forgetting that they may have started off with something as simple as a caffeine powder in a drink in a kitchen, laughing about it.
I agree. I think I see a lot of these trends probably on like couple videos where they're playing around with these boundaries of respect and consent. And a few of them look like, they're joking. And then in the comments and caption section, they will kind of clarify that it's a joke, it's not to be taken seriously. But then a few, it's like, it doesn't feel like a joke. And in the comments, you look at it, in the caption, you look at it, and you know that the intentions are not that they're not the right intentions behind the joke or the prank. And I think that kind of like just seeing how these ideas and these concepts take a life of their own on social media. Uh, Talking about social media in prevention, like you said, like the first thing being telling them that everything you see is not real, is something that's going to become very integral as we go into preventive efforts more and more. Because with, like you said, with the coming around of artificial intelligence and social media and the internet and just the younger generations being more and more online all the time, prevention efforts need to probably start including this internet language in, so that it's in a way that they also understand and they can also relate that like all the stuff they see online is not real, all the stuff they see online is not probably safe to practice either. And in a way, it almost kind of adds to the growth of prevention efforts, but it comes at like a much more dangerous cost than traditionally what we would have seen, like as just spiking in a bar or something versus seeing it as a trend online.
Right. Yeah, they are normalizing it. And that is a very scary situation to be happening because, again, yes, roofies are inhibiting an individual, they're incapacitating someone with that specific drug. With caffeine, you're increasing their energy so that they don't want to sleep. But honestly, it's just a short skip and a jump away between the two. They are both giving, they are both items that are being given to someone in order to get to the same specific goal, which is sex, which is to control the individual, whether they want to or not, to have some sex. And so they both might be the exact polar opposite of how they impact the body, but they have the same effect at the end of the day as far as what the intention is from that person that's giving it to them. Now, the concern is that, yes, in secret, when it's no consent, that's 100% wrong. But the concern is if there has been consent, if there is a little bit of consent, if the partner is laughing and joking, is that consent? I know a lot of people are going to argue that's not consent. Some are going to argue, yes, it is consent because they're okay, they're playing, they're laughing. I started off by talking about healthy and unhealthy relationships. I am aware and I know that there are healthy relationships that will use chocolate infused, you know, items in order to have more of sexual pleasure in the relationship consensually. So it's a very slippery slope to be able to judge right away. I think with the things that we're observing on TikTok, as I stated, I think there are some that are sensationalizing things in order to just simply get the likes and the followers and the attention and the monetary gain from social media, to be quite honest. And so we need to be cautious of believing everything we see. But at the same time, we do need to consider the fact that consent is very serious. And when we see these platforms allowing the jokes to appear, we need to remember how severe it can become. And it should be sobering when we think about our kids that might be watching these things.
And I think just to add to that, one of the interesting things I've seen is the accounts that do post the, consensually using the chocolates, the caffeine infused chocolates, or any other form of aphrodisiac that's available for sale. They will always include it in their caption, some way or the other, that like both people have wanted to do it. And then if you even go to the platform where these like chocolates or whatever are being sold, you'll always find like a cautionary little thing that says, it has to be used with consent, with complete consent only you can use it. So I think it's interesting that they acknowledge that these things can exist, like you said, in a healthy relationship. They're almost like a additional bolster to the health of the relationship. And these platforms and companies also acknowledge that while ensuring that consent is actively involved. And then on the flip side of it, where these trends are concerned, and you look at, for instance, in this specific trend, you look at pre-workout powder, no one had ever even thought that it could be used in this way. And so if you go to these websites where they sell these pre-workout powders, you'll never see the word or use with consent because it was never even conceived to be used that way. So I think that's also interesting when we talk about like the larger things of how we see these trends, how we react to them, how real or unreal we think these are. I think the use of the products within these trends also equally matter because the intentionality behind putting out those products adds to the conversation as well.
Right. I mean, and there's been several situations where individuals have too much caffeine, their heart rate starts to race, and they have a heart attack. And so, again, this can be the exact opposite effect, right? You have the roofies that incapacitate and basically make someone unconscious, which is the absolute worst thing that can happen, especially for someone that's going to be victimized and becomes a rape victim. For the individual that gets these powders, it's also scary because what if they have a bad reaction to the caffeine? What if their partner puts too much in there? And so it is not okay. It's again an escalating behavior. And so it's something to be very cautious of and something that partners should be discussing, in the privacy of their own home, if they're married or dating or living together, and then also discussing as a dating relationship whether they're living together or not, because of the fact that anything you put in your body to accelerate intimacy can always be extreme and too much. There can always be a limit, a limitation that gets surpassed, and then there's harm. And so that is just the reality. And again, Nandini, it's such a interesting topic, so much that we can circle around and continue circling. But I think for now, I think we kind of covered this topic pretty well. And are there any final thoughts you have on it?
No, I just, like you said, there is a lot to talk about, and I know for a fact that this season we're going to keep coming back to facets of consent, the language of consent. So we're going to definitely keep talking about this, but I think this was like a great conversation to start with because people seem to be more virtually online these days. And so to start our season off by talking about something that we've seen online a lot, uh, connects us right back, like lets us like allows us to jump right back in without like taking a pause or a break. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And for those of you that have a strong opinion, share it with us. If you think that it is okay to add these powders into your partner's drink without them knowing, let us know. And for those of you that believe that you always need consent no matter what, Let us know that too. We want to hear from you. We want to hear the comments. We want to review them and we want to respond to them also. So, remember that we're here for the dialogue primarily. So if you like everything we're doing, subscribe to us, like us, follow us. We're on multiple platforms. And welcome to season 2. This is just the beginning, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.